My son-in-law ripped Rose's apron off in my kitchen and fired her for the crime of asking me if I wanted more soup. The pocket tore loose, and 3 of my late wife's silver teaspoons spilled across the black and white tile, ringing like tiny alarms. My hand closed so hard around the spoon I was holding that it bent against my palm. Evan didn't even look ashamed. He stood there in his tailored gray sweater, jaw tight, eyes bright with that polished kind of anger men use when they think they're the only adult in the room, and said, "I have told you before. Staff do not sit and chat with residents." Residents? In my house? Rose's face drained of color. My daughter stared at the granite island like it had suddenly become fascinating. And I looked at my son-in-law and said 6 words that changed the rest of his life. "You picked the wrong witness, Evan." At the time, he smirked. By dawn, he wasn't smirking anymore. Because Rosa called me that night with a shaking voice and said, "Mr. Grayson, there's something you should know." And what she told me explained the missing brass key, the pills that kept leaving me foggy, the locked study door, and why my own daughter had stopped meeting my eyes. That phone call was only the beginning. And if you've ever watched family dress-up cruelty is concerned, stay with me, because the truth was uglier than I imagined. The first sign Evan wanted me smaller came months before he fired Rosa. It was my chair. Not just any chair. A faded green leather armchair that used to sit in the sunroom, right under the eastern windows where the morning light came in gold and thin through the maple branches. My wife, Mary Ann, used to call it my harbor. 40 years ago, I bought that chair secondhand and re-stitched the arm with waxed thread because we couldn't afford a new one. I read Claire bedtime stories in that chair. I sat in it the night Mary Ann told me she was pregnant. I sat in it the morning after we buried her because the house was too quiet, and I needed something that still knew the shape of me. One Tuesday, I walked in with my coffee and found it gone. A white sculptural bench had replaced it. Cold-looking thing. No back, no history. When I asked Claire where my chair was, she said too quickly, "We moved it downstairs." Evan said the room needed to feel lighter. Needed to feel lighter. Like my grief was heavy furniture. I found the chair in the basement beside paint cans and a broken oscillating fan, draped with 2 moving blankets like a body no one had claimed. I remember standing there with the pull chain light buzzing overhead and feeling something shift inside me. Not break, not yet, but shift. The house I had built with my own hands was starting to be rearranged around the inconvenience of me. That should have warned me. It didn't warn me enough. I'm Thomas Grayson, 68. Father of 1 daughter, grandfather of 1 very sharp, 16-year-old girl, widower for 3 years, cabinet maker by trade, the kind of man who still oils his tools and saves rubber bands in a kitchen drawer because waste irritates him on a moral level. This house sits on a hill above the river outside Hartford. White clapboard, wraparound porch, cedar shake roof. I installed myself in the summer of 1998, with both knees still good, and Mary Ann on a ladder below me passing up bundles and telling me not to be stubborn. Every doorframe in that house passed through my hands. Every built-in shelf, every dent in the old pine floors has a story attached to it. The nick by the mudroom was Claire at 8, skating in socks. The faint ring on the dining table was Mary Ann forgetting a hot pot while we laughed too hard to care. When people say a house is just a house, I know they've never buried a life in one. Claire and Evan moved in for a little while after his commercial real estate venture went sideways. That was the phrase. A little while. He'd over-leveraged on 2 developments. A lender pulled out, and suddenly the polished couple with the curated Christmas cards and Napa anniversary trips needed help. I had already helped before. I paid half of Claire's graduate school tuition when Mary Ann got sick, because Claire wouldn't take money from us unless I called it a loan. I covered Evan's tax bill once when a deal collapsed and he stood in my driveway sweating through a cashmere coat, talking about timing and liquidity and how embarrassed he was. I emptied a retirement account to keep them from losing their first condo when Lily was 6 and the market chewed him up. I always told myself I was helping my daughter. That's how men like me get stripped for parts. We mistake love for endless access. At first, I didn't mind having them there. The house felt less hollow with Lily's sneakers by the back door, and music leaking from upstairs and someone else reaching for the orange marmalade at breakfast. Claire cooked on Sundays. Evan brought expensive wine. He talked about too much. There were moments I could almost pretend the shape of the family had changed, not ended. Then the language changed. My downstairs study became your suite. The pantry became common space. The monthly utility bills I had always paid quietly out of habit became something we can streamline if we centralize accounts. Evan had a gift for making a takeover sound like project management. He never shouted in the beginning. Men like Evan almost never do. They smile. They place a hand on the back of a chair. They talk about efficiency and optics and what makes the most sense for everyone. If there is a knife in the room, they wrap it in linen first. "Tom," he said one night while swirling Pinot Noir over Marianne's old table, "you shouldn't worry about household operations anymore. You've carried enough." Household operations. He meant my own life. Claire sat beside him, tired around the eyes, twisting her wedding band. "Dad, he's just saying we want to take things off your plate." The strange thing about being slowly erased is how often it arrives dressed as kindness. I might have pushed back sooner if it had been uglier sooner, but it came in layers. My mail began arriving already opened by accident. My pharmacy deliveries were transferred to the house account for convenience. Evan installed smart locks and never quite remembered to give me every code. Once, I came home from the hardware store and found the front door dead-bolted because they had forgotten I'd gone out. He apologized with a hand on my shoulder and an expression so sincere it would have fooled a jury. Rosa was the only one in that house who never treated me like an item to be managed. She came on twice a week at first, then 4 days once. Claire decided the place needed real maintenance. Rosa was in her 50s, compact and steady, with dark hair pinned at the nape of her neck, and a way of moving through rooms like she respected them. She dusted around framed photos instead of sliding them carelessly. She knew which cup had been Marianne's favorite, the blue one with the tiny chip near the handle, and she always set it on the right side of the saucer because Marianne had been left-handed. The first time I noticed that, I had to look away. Rosa would ask if I'd eaten. She'd tell me when the basil on the porch needed water. Sometimes she'd sit for 3 minutes at the end of the kitchen table while I had lunch, just long enough to ask about the river or tell me what flower beds needed mulching. Nothing dramatic, just human recognition. In a house full of carefully managed tone, Rosa spoke to me like I still occupied my own outline. Evan hated that. I didn't understand how much until later. The second sign something was wrong was the brass key. For 31 years, that key hung on a little iron hook behind the pantry door. Long stem, clover-shaped bow, worn bright along one edge where Marianne's thumb used to rub it. It opened the lower drawer of the roll-top desk in the study, the old walnut one my father left me. Marianne kept important papers there because she believed in paper more than passwords. Deeds, tax returns, insurance policies, Lily's first crayon drawing of our house, the note Claire wrote at 10 apologizing for breaking a lamp and blaming the cat. Marianne saved everything worth proving. One rainy afternoon in October, I reached for the key and touched empty wall. I stood there longer than I should have, fingers resting against the iron hook, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the rain tapping the porch roof. Then I checked the desk. Locked. I asked Claire if she'd moved the key. She frowned. "No, why would I?" Evan answered from the hallway before I could say anything else. "Maybe you misplaced it." Misplaced it? I had lived with that key in the same place since George H.W. Bush was president. "What would I do with it?" I asked. He gave a little shrug. "That's what we're all trying to figure out these days, Tom. Maybe let's not get worked up." That line sat in my chest like a nail. Maybe let's not get worked up. I let it pass because Lily was in the room and because anger, once you're an older man in your own house, becomes evidence against you faster than truth ever becomes evidence for you. That was something I was beginning to learn. Every sigh, every raised eyebrow, every forgotten word after a bad night's sleep could be collected, labeled, and held up as concern. And there was one more thing. I had started waking groggy. Not every day. Just often enough to notice. A cotton-heavy fog behind my eyes, mouth dry, legs slow, as if I had taken a sleeping pill I never remembered swallowing. At first I blamed age, then the colder weather, then the blood pressure medication my doctor had adjusted. But I'd been managing my own pills for years. I kept them in a walnut organizer Mary Ann gave me, 7 slim compartments with brass hinges. Monday through Sunday, morning and night. Order gave me comfort. One Thursday, I opened the Tuesday night section because I could not remember if I'd taken it. There was a blue oval pill in there I did not recognize. I stared at it for a long time. When I brought it up at dinner, Claire said, "Dad, maybe the manufacturer changed." Evan didn't even look up from his phone. "That happens all the time." He said it too quickly. I should have pocketed the pill. I didn't. I wish I had. I swallowed my uncertainty with the rest of my dinner and told myself not to turn into one of those suspicious old men who sees conspiracies in ordinary confusion. But ordinary confusion doesn't steal keys. And it doesn't lock a study. By November, Evan had started using my study as his temporary office. That was another phrase. Temporary. He set up 2 monitors on Mary Ann's writing desk, rolled in a leather chair with chrome arms, and began taking calls behind a closed door. One afternoon, I turned the knob and found it locked from inside. My own study. In my own house. I knocked. A beat later, he opened the door just enough to show me one eye and half a smile. "I'm in something sensitive. I need my file cabinet. I'll have Rosa bring you anything you need." I can still feel the cold that passed through me then. Not because of the inconvenience. Because of the hierarchy buried in that sentence. "I'll have Rosa bring you anything you need." As if I required permission to access my own papers. What happened after that made it worse. A week before Thanksgiving, I came downstairs early and heard voices in the kitchen. Evan and Claire. Low enough to hide, not low enough to miss. "We can't wait until spring," Evan was saying. "If he declines publicly, the value of the property becomes part of a mess. We need a cleaner transition." Claire whispered something I couldn't catch. Then Evan again, sharper. "Claire, this is not cruelty. This is management. He cannot stay in that house forever pretending nothing changes. That house. Not his house. Not our house. That house." I stepped back before the floorboard under the rug could creak, and carried those words all day like a burn I didn't know where to place. When Claire asked me at dinner if I wanted more stuffing, she smiled too brightly. Her guilt had started to look rehearsed. You always think the bottom is lower than it is. Then one day you realize you've been standing on it for weeks. The day Rosa was fired started with a luncheon I hadn't agreed to. Claire said some people from the Church Restoration Committee were coming by to talk about a donor event in December. Mary Ann used to support the church roof fund every year, and Claire said they wanted to use the house because it photographs beautifully with the river. Evan said it would be good for community visibility. Everything with him was visibility. The kitchen smelled like roasted carrots and thyme. Rain clouds sat low over the backyard. Someone had polished the silver too hard. I could smell the metallic tang of it under the food. Rosa moved quietly between the counter and stove in her dark skirt and white blouse, tying on one of the aprons Mary Ann used to keep folded in the linen drawer. White cotton. Tiny blue stitched border. My wife's hands had hemmed that border during a blizzard 20 years ago. I had been told gently that it might be better if I ate in the breakfast room because the committee doesn't need the house to feel crowded. Crowded. I said no. Not loudly. Just no. One syllable, old and plain. So I sat at the kitchen table instead. Because that was where Mary Ann and I had eaten soup on snowy afternoons and paid bills and argued about whether the porch needed repainting and laughed until tea came out her nose, the day Lily announced at age 5 that Jesus probably liked lasagna more than fish because nobody likes fish that much. I sat there because if I surrendered the kitchen table, I knew exactly what came next. Rosa put a bowl in front of me and quietly asked, "Would you like more bread, Mr. Grayson?" I said yes. She pulled out the chair across from me for a second while the oven timer beeped, and she sat down just long enough to rub her ankle and tell me she thought the frost would kill the basil. I remember the steam from the soup fogging my glasses. I remember the rain tapping the windows. I remember feeling, for a stupid little moment, almost normal. Then Evan walked in. He took in the scene, the bowl, the chair, Rosa sitting, me existing, and something in him snapped clean through the veneer. He crossed the kitchen fast, fingers hooking into the tie of Rosa's apron at her back. "What did I say?" he hissed. Rosa jumped to her feet. Evan yanked the knot loose so hard the pocket ripped and the silver teaspoon spilled across the tile. "Staff do not fraternize with residents," he said, louder now because he knew Claire was in the next room and wanted his righteousness witnessed. "If you can't follow boundaries, you can leave." I stood up so quickly my knee cracked. "Don't," I said. He ignored me. Of course he ignored me. Rosa's voice trembled. "I was asking if he wanted bread." "And I am telling you," Evan said, "you do your job and stop encouraging dependence." Dependence. The word hit me so hard I tasted iron. Claire appeared in the doorway, one hand to her throat. "Evan." "No," he snapped. "This is exactly the problem. Everyone indulges him. Everyone treats him like he gets to override structure. Him, not me, not Tom, not your wife's father. Him." That was when I bent the spoon in my hand without meaning to. And that was when I looked at him and said, "You picked the wrong witness, Evan." He laughed once under his breath. "Witness to what? Lunch?" Rosa looked at me then, really looked at me, and in her face I saw fear. Not for herself. For me. That was the part that froze my blood. She took off the torn apron, folded it with both hands like she was trying to return dignity to something, and walked out the side door into the rain. Claire ran after her. Evan straightened his cuffs. Then he turned to me and said in a softer voice, almost pitying, "Tom, you make things harder when you blur roles." Blur roles. I think I hated him most in that moment, not because he was cruel, but because he wanted the language of cruelty to sound responsible. I went downstairs without answering. Past the framed photos. Past the grandfather clock. Past the umbrella stand Mary Ann bought at a yard sale and refinished with me one summer. In the hallway mirror I saw a man with white at his temples and rage he was holding by the throat. My room smelled faintly of cedar and old books. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at Mary Ann's blue winter coat hanging on the closet door. She'd had the lining mended twice because she refused to replace it. Said good wool deserved loyalty. When she died, I couldn't bring myself to move it. That coat mattered later. At the time, it was just something I looked at when I needed to remember my life had once been anchored by someone honest. Night fell badly. No one came down for dinner. Around 8, Claire texted, "Can we talk tomorrow?" Evan is upset, and I think it's best everyone cools down. Everyone. I did not answer. At 9:17, my phone rang. "Rosa," her voice was whisper thin. "Mr. Grayson, I'm sorry to call so late." "You did nothing wrong." "I know," she said, and then went quiet long enough that I could hear traffic on her end and the tiny rattle of a turn signal. "That's why I'm calling. There's something you should know." Every muscle in my back locked. "Tell me." She took a breath. He wanted me to lie. I closed my eyes. "About what?" "About you. About your behavior." Her words came faster now, as if once they started, they had to run. He had a folder in the office. A thick gray folder labeled Transition. I saw it when I was cleaning last week because he left the desk open. There were papers from a place called Willow Creek Memory Residence. There was a listing agreement for your house. And there were written statements for staff to sign. My mouth went dry. "What kind of statements?" She hesitated. "That you wander? That you forget where you are? That you shouted at me? That once you grabbed my wrist when I tried to take a knife from you?" I sat absolutely still. "That never happened." "I know it never happened," she said, suddenly fierce. "That is why he fired me. This afternoon, before lunch, he asked me again if I would sign. He said it was for your safety." I said no. A buzzing started in my ears. "He told me the family meeting is tomorrow morning," Rosa continued. "He said there will be a director from the residence, a real estate woman, and someone to witness your daughter as power of attorney." Power of attorney. For a second, I could not feel my own hands. He already has papers? I asked. I saw a document with your name, Rosa said. And one more thing. Your pillbox. He told your daughter last week that if you seemed confused, it would help move things faster. I saw him take bottles from the kitchen drawer and put pills into your organizer. I did not know what they were. I am sorry, I should have told you sooner. The room seemed to tilt. All those mornings, the fog, the dry mouth, the heavy legs. There are discoveries that wound you and discoveries that rearrange your understanding of the past hour, the past month, the whole architecture of your trust. This was the second kind. Suddenly every open envelope, every locked door, every softened word from Claire, every too careful question about my sleep and my balance, and whether I remembered what day it was. It all clicked together into one machine. A machine built to make me disappear politely. Rosa, I said, did you see where he put the key from behind the pantry door? She went silent for a beat. The brass key? I saw him in your wife's closet with it. He had your blue coat on the bed. I remember because I thought it was strange. I looked at Mary Ann's coat. Thank you, I said softly. There is more, Rosa whispered. I took pictures of the folder. I was afraid no one would believe me later. My eyes stung so suddenly I had to swallow twice before I could speak. Can you send them? Yes. My phone chimed 20 seconds later. I opened the first image and there it was, the gray folder on Evan's borrowed desk. Tabs, highlighted notes. My name typed in bold. Underneath it, in neat black letters, transition timeline. The second photo showed a page titled Observed Incidents. 11/3. Subject disoriented upon waking. 11/7. Subject resistant to care. 11/10. Subject verbally aggressive toward domestic staff. 11/12. Subject fixated on deceased spouse. 11/16. Recommendation. Expedited placement before holiday stressors increase volatility. Subject, not father, not Tom, not even client. Subject. The third photo was worse. A listing packet from a luxury brokerage, complete with preliminary valuation, drone shots of the property, and a handwritten note in Evan's slanted script. Stage study, remove old office furniture, light occupancy narrative. Light occupancy narrative. My life reduced to a staging problem. But the fourth picture made my heart slow for a completely different reason. It was a copy of the trust summary Mary Ann and I had signed years earlier after her father's estate turned into a feeding frenzy among her siblings. I knew the document. We'd set it up so the house would remain under my control for life, then pass to Claire. A sensible plan. But in Rose's photograph, one clause had been highlighted in yellow. Any beneficiary who attempts to coerce transfer, declare incapacity in bad faith, or interfere with lifetime occupancy forfeits all interest in the residence. I read it 3 times. Then I stood up. That was the moment I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling clear. Mary Ann had seen this kind of hunger before. Not in Evan, he didn't exist in our lives when we drafted it, but in families who smelled real estate and started calling greed concern. She had insisted on that clause after her own brothers tried to rush her mother out of a farmhouse she loved. I remember arguing that it was harsh. Mary Ann said, then decent people will never trigger it. God, I missed her then. I crossed to the closet and took down the blue coat. It still smelled faintly of her perfume beneath the cedar blocks I kept in the pockets. I ran my fingers along the inside seam and felt a tiny ridge near the hem. I laughed. Just once. Soft and disbelieving. Mary Ann hid spare cash there during road trips when Claire was little, in case my wallet got lost or I insisted I didn't need to stop for gas. I fetched my reading glasses, found the old stitch line, and slid 2 fingers inside the lining. Cold metal touched my knuckle. The spare key. I sat on the bed with it in my palm for a full 10 seconds, breathing through my nose, looking at Mary Ann's coat pooled around me like she had put one last hand on my shoulder. Then I went upstairs. The house was quiet except for the dishwasher and a television murmuring somewhere above. The study door was unlocked now. Evan probably assumed I was downstairs doing what frightened men like him count on, doubting myself. I shut the door behind me and crossed to the roll-top desk. The brass key slid in with a sound that reached back 30 years. The lock turned. Inside the lower drawer were deed copies, tax binders, Lily's kindergarten turkey with one googly eye missing, and the original trust packet in Mary Ann's neat tabbed folders. There was also an envelope clipped to the inside wall. My name on the front. Mary Ann's handwriting. Tom, if you're opening this without me, be stubborn. I had to sit down. Inside was a single page. Not prophecy, not melodrama. Just Mary Ann being Mary Ann. A note from years ago after we set up the trust, reminding me where the originals were kept, who our attorney was, and one line underlined twice. Never surrender your home to people calling theft help. I pressed the note flat on the desk with both hands and bowed my head until the sting behind my eyes passed. Then I called Sam Patel. Sam and I met in junior high when we both got suspended for fighting the same bully for different reasons. He became an estate lawyer with a voice like gravel and the patience of a man who has heard every version of family self-justification known to earth. When Mary Ann was dying, Sam came to the house twice to make sure the trust reflected exactly what she wanted. He picked up on the third ring. Tom, you all right? No, I said, but I think I'm about to be. I told him everything, not the emotional version, the clean version. Rose's call, the photos, the pills, the key, the claws. Sam didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he said, do not confront them alone tonight. Photograph every original document. Forward me Rose's images. Keep the spare key on you, and tomorrow let them assemble their little intervention. You want me to let them? I want witnesses, he said, and I want them comfortable enough to say too much. That should have terrified me. Instead, it steadied me, because I finally understood the shape of what I was dealing with. Evan wasn't improvising. He had a plan, which meant he had blind spots. Men who build secret procedures always assume no one else knows the script. I spent the next hour working like the old cabinet maker I still was inside. Careful. Exact. No wasted motion. I photographed every page of the trust and deed. I found the pharmacy bottles in the kitchen drawer and took pictures of those too, including one prescription in Claire's name for a sleep medication I had never been prescribed. I checked my walnut organizer. 2 more blue ovals sat in the next night compartment like tiny dropped masks. I put them in an envelope. Then my phone lit up again. Lily, Grandpa, are you awake? I stared at the screen before answering yes. She texted back immediately. I heard what happened with Rosa. Mom is crying. Dad is acting like you're unstable. Please tell me the truth. There are moments in life when the next sentence determines what kind of man you still are. I could have protected her with vagueness. I could have fed her the same diluted poison Claire had been swallowing for months. Instead, I typed, the truth is your father is trying to force me out of my house, and I may need your courage tomorrow. She called within 10 seconds. When I answered, she was already crying, but angry crying, the kind that comes hot and bright. I knew something was wrong, she said. I knew it. He kept asking if you remembered things in this fake voice, and Mom kept telling me not to upset you by mentioning the house. What do you need? I closed my eyes for a second. Do you have anything, I asked carefully, that shows conversations I wasn't meant to hear? Silence. Then, maybe. That one word changed the temperature of the room. Lily told me she'd been using an old baby monitor camera in the upstairs hallway to keep an eye on their golden retriever when everyone was out. It saved clips to her tablet. 2 nights earlier she had heard her parents arguing on the landing and recorded part of it because she thought her mother sounded scared. I didn't know if it mattered, she said. Send it to me. When the clip came through, I watched it once. Then a second time. Claire's voice first, tight with panic. You said this would be temporary. Evan, temporary doesn't move assets. Claire, don't say it like that. Evan, lower now, colder. Then stop reacting to the wording. He signs, or we proceed with incapacity. Either way, by Christmas this property is ours to manage. Manage. Always that language of management. The words of clean theft. Then Claire again, almost whispering, "And if Dad finds out?" Evan laughed. "He won't. He barely notices what day it is after the nighttime meds. I didn't watch it a third time. I didn't need to. 3 days later, everything would change. But first I had to survive the morning. I slept maybe 90 minutes. The kind of sleep where your body goes under and your mind stands guard. At 6:30 I showered, shaved, and put on the charcoal suit Marianne liked on me because she said it made me look annoyingly honorable. White shirt, navy tie. If they meant to present me as a confused old man, I intended to disappoint them aesthetically before I disappointed them legally. The house smelled of coffee and cinnamon when I came upstairs. Claire was already arranging pastries on a white platter. She looked at me and stopped moving. "Dad," she said carefully, "we need to have a conversation this morning." "I know." Something in my voice made her flinch. She started to say more, but the doorbell rang. By 9:15, the dining room was full. Not packed, just precise, which somehow made it uglier. There was Dana Wilcox from Willow Creek Memory Residence in a cream blazer and soft shoes, carrying the expression of a woman who'd been told she was there to ease a difficult transition. There was Melissa Trent, a real estate agent I recognized from glossy mailers featuring kitchens too spotless to cook in. There was one of Evan's church friends from the finance committee and his wife, because apparently concern travels better with respectable witnesses. There was Claire, pale and overdressed, and Lily on the far side of the buffet gripping her phone like it was the only honest object in the room. Evan moved among them in a blue jacket, coffee cup in hand, every inch the composed son trying to do the hard right thing. He had even used Marianne's linen napkins. That almost made me admire the scale of his nerve. "Tom," he said warmly when everyone had settled, "why don't you sit? We've gathered because we care about you." I sat at the head of the table. My place. The old carved chair with the repaired leg. The silver coffee pot reflected the room in warped pieces. Dana began in that trained, gentle tone. "Mr. Grayson, sometimes families find it helpful to talk openly about support needs." "Before we start," I said, "I'd like to wait for 2 more people." Evan's smile held, but only just. "I don't think that's necessary." "It is to me." The doorbell rang again. Claire turned white. Sam walked in first, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who had driven over with his jaw set. Behind him came Rosa in a dark coat, chin lifted despite the fear in her eyes. I don't think I'll ever forget the look on Evan's face. It wasn't panic yet, it was offense, the expression of a man who thinks the script has been violated by someone beneath him. "What is she doing here?" he said. Rosa didn't answer. Sam did. "Ensuring accuracy," he said, and pulled out a chair. No one sat down for a moment. The radiator hissed. Outside, wind nudged bare branches against the window. Dana from Willow Creek glanced at Melissa the realtor, and Melissa glanced right back, both of them suddenly understanding they had walked into something very different from a tidy family consultation. Evan recovered first. Of course he did. "Tom," he said, adopting the patient voice again, "if this is an attempt to create drama, it only reinforces everyone's concerns." "That would have landed better," I said, "if you hadn't invited a real estate agent to my incapacity meeting." Melissa went still. Claire turned toward Evan so fast her chair legs scraped the floor. "You told me Melissa was here to discuss market timing for the church fundraiser." Melissa blinked. "I was told the family was exploring a transition and wanted a preliminary occupancy strategy." Occupancy strategy. I watched the meaning hit Claire in the face. Evan stepped in smoothly. "Because your father cannot continue alone, and if we're discussing care, we'd be irresponsible not to evaluate property implications." There it was. Property implications, not grief, not home, not dignity. Not the man who taught Claire to ride a bicycle and held her hair when she was sick and paid the down payment on the condo where she brought her baby home. Property implications. Sam opened his briefcase and set a stack of folders on the table. "Before anyone says another word," he said, "I'd like each person here to receive copies of 3 documents." He handed them out with the calm efficiency of a surgeon laying tools in order. Trust summary. Photograph packet. Transcript. Evan didn't touch his folder. Claire did. Her fingers trembled. Dana from Willow Creek started reading and slowly lowered her eyes from professional softness to professional alarm. "What is this?" Evan said. I looked at him across my wife's table. "This," I said, "is the part where your management problems start speaking." You could feel the room lean toward me. I slid the envelope with the blue pills onto the table. These were placed in my nighttime organizer. They are not prescribed to me. One of the bottles they came from is prescribed to my daughter. Claire looked down at the envelope like it was a snake. "Tom," Evan said, too fast, "you don't know what you're implying." "I know exactly what I'm implying." Sam spoke without raising his voice. "We also have photographic evidence of drafted incident statements, a premature listing package, and a proposed power of attorney process tied to an incapacity narrative that appears to have been manufactured." Rosa finally said, "He asked me to sign a lie." Her voice carried harder than she expected. The room listened. Evan turned on her at once. "You were terminated for insubordination." "No," Rosa said, and I saw her shoulders straighten. "I was fired because I would not say he hurt me when he did not." That landed. Claire covered her mouth. "I kept going because if you stop in moments like that, manipulative people rush to fill the silence." "I have lived in this house for 40 years, I said. "I have paid every tax bill, repaired every gutter, replaced every window on the north side after the hailstorm of 2006, and buried my wife from the front porch of this home while half this town brought casseroles through that door. And for months, my son-in-law has been opening my mail, locking my study, altering my medication, and preparing paperwork to remove me under the language of care." Evan laughed then, but there was nothing easy in it. "This is absurd." "Is it?" Sam asked. He tapped the third document. Lily's transcript. Claire's eyes snapped to the page. She read the first few lines, then looked at Evan as if she had never seen his face correctly before. "What is this?" she whispered. Evan finally lost a shade of color. A conversation taken out of context. Lily stood up. "No," she said. Her voice shook once and then steadied. "I recorded it because Mom sounded scared. You said, 'By Christmas, this property is ours to manage.' You said Grandpa wouldn't know because of the nighttime meds. There's a sound a family makes when the prettified lie dies in the room. Not a scream, not a gasp, more like the air itself giving up." Claire stared at him. "Tell me you didn't say that." He switched tactics immediately. "Men like him always do." "Claire, think. Your father is manipulating you. He has always made you feel guilty enough to let him control everything. I am the only one willing to do what is practical." Practical. He had reached for the same old blade again. But now everyone could see it. Dana from Willow Creek closed her folder. "Mr. Grayson," she said to Evan, "not me. My facility does not participate in admissions based on disputed family narratives or questionable medication practices. I'm leaving." Melissa the realtor followed almost before the sentence ended. "And I am absolutely not continuing any property discussion." Evan took a step toward them. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Sam said. "It is the beginning of a fraud record." Then he placed one final sheet on the table and turned it so Claire could see it first. The highlighted clause. The one Marianne insisted on. I watched Claire read the line about coercion, bad faith incapacity, interference with lifetime occupancy, forfeiture of interest. Her face emptied. "Evan," she said faintly, "did you know about this?" He said nothing. That silence answered better than words. Sam did the rest. "As of this morning," he said, "I have filed notice preserving Mr. Grayson's rights and documenting potential elder abuse, attempted coercive transfer, and fraudulent incapacity proceedings. Any beneficiary who participated in bad faith risks forfeiting their claim under the trust." Claire looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in months, and I saw the full shape of her horror. Not just at him, at herself. At every time she had let him rename cruelty as necessity, and told herself adulthood meant surrendering to the person with the steadiest voice. Evan tried one last move. He spread his hands, calm returning by force. "Tom, whatever you think happened, You're blowing this up because you cannot accept change. You need support. Everyone here can see that. I stood. My knee protested. My back ached. My heart felt like it had been dragged over stone. But I stood at the head of my own table and let him look at the full man he had mistaken for a soft target. You're right about one thing, I said. I can't accept change that arrives as theft. No one moved. You wanted me sleepy, documented, politely relocated, and grateful for the concern. You wanted my daughter to call it responsibility, and my granddaughter to call it normal, and the people in this room to call it sad but necessary. You thought age would make me easy. You thought grief made me weak. What it made me was observant. His jaw tightened. Then I picked up Mary Ann's blue napkin ring from beside my plate and set it on the table between us. My wife saw men like you coming from miles away, I said. That clause you ignored? She wrote it into our lives because she knew some people use family as a crowbar. You have 48 hours to remove your belongings from this property. Until then, you do not enter my study, you do not touch my medication, and you do not speak to household staff on my behalf. You can't throw me out on a tantrum, he snapped. No, Sam said evenly. He's doing it on ownership. Then, because Sam understood theater when truth required it, he nodded toward the foyer. A county deputy stepped in from the front hall. Not an arrest, not handcuffs. Real life is usually less cinematic than vengeance fantasies. But the deputy's presence said what needed saying. This had crossed out of family discussion and into documented seriousness. Evan went very still. The deputy said, "Sir, I'm here for civil standby due to a property dispute. No one is leaving in custody today. But there will be no further interference with Mr. Grayson's access to his residence." That was enough. Because the room had changed sides. Because Dana had already left in disgust. Because Melissa was texting someone in the foyer. Because Lily had moved to stand behind my chair. Because Claire was crying without looking at her husband. Because Rosa, whom he had treated like disposable labor, was standing in the dining room of the house he meant to stage empty, and she had become the witness he never saw coming. Evan looked at Claire. "Say something." She did. But not for him. "Take your things," she whispered. He stared at her. "I said take your things. There are defeats that happen in court filings and bank records and property deeds. And then there are defeats that happen in the exact tone a woman uses when she finally stops lending her mouth to someone else's version of reality." Evan tried to rally once more. "Claire, if you do this, you have no idea what you're throwing away." She laughed through tears. "No, I know exactly what I almost threw away." He left the room without another word. Not gracefully, not dramatically. Just with the stunned, brittle posture of a man who had mistaken control for invincibility. And that, strangely, was more satisfying than any shout could have been. The fallout moved quickly after that. Sam stayed. So did the deputy until Evan gathered enough clothes and electronics for 2 nights at a hotel and drove away in the black SUV he always parked too close to the front steps. Claire sat at the kitchen table for an hour after he left, hands wrapped around Mary Ann's blue chipped mug, crying in the same place where she used to do homework while I made her grilled cheese. She said, "I knew he was pushing. I didn't know how far. I swear to you, Dad, I didn't know about the pills." I believed her on that part, not because she deserved easy forgiveness, but because guilt and ignorance have different textures when they finally surface. Claire had been cowardly. She had been vain enough to enjoy Evan making disorder disappear from life. She had let herself believe that comfort and righteousness could be the same thing. But when it came to drugging me and falsifying my decline, I saw genuine shock. That did not erase what she had allowed. Nothing erases quickly when the wound has had time to set. "I'm not asking you to leave today," I told her. "I am asking you to stop lying to yourself in my house." She bent forward and wept hard enough to shake. Lily came around the table and put a hand on my shoulder. Such a small thing. Such a steady thing. In that moment, I understood something clean and painful. Real family is not the person who shares your blood or your last name or your dining room. Real family is the person who tells the truth when the lie would benefit them more. Rosa came back the next week. Not because I begged her, Because I asked respectfully whether she would consider it, under her own terms, with higher pay and no one above me directing her work. She stood in the kitchen, looked around as if measuring whether the house itself had changed, and finally smiled. "I will come back," she said. "But only if you stop calling this bothering me." So I stopped. Sam referred the matter to the right channels. The pharmacy documentation mattered. The false statements mattered. The recording mattered most of all because it showed intent, and intent is where polished people get ugly under fluorescent light. Evan spent the next several months paying lawyers to explain away language that sounded exactly like what it was. His brokerage placed him on leave during the investigation. Church people, I learned, become extremely interested in ethics when the Riverview house they admired turns out to be a stage for elder coercion. There was no dramatic perp walk. No music swelling while justice slammed a gavel. Real justice is often quieter. It looks like bank access restored. Mail arriving unopened. Locks recoded by the man whose hands built the doors. It looks like a dining room table where no one says resident. Claire separated from Evan by February. I wish I could tell you that was the moment everything healed, but healing is slower and less flattering than story endings pretend. Some days I looked at her and saw my little girl in pigtails holding a dead tomato plant, asking if love could fix roots. Some days I looked at her and saw the woman who let her husband teach her to inventory her father like furniture. Both were true. We started with truth because nothing else was left to start with. She moved into the upstairs guest room for a while, then found a rental across town for herself and Lily once the dust settled. We had dinners on Sundays for months before we managed anything like ease. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes I did not let that move me as quickly as it once would have. Boundaries, I learned late, are just self-respect with a lock on the door. Lily kept coming by after school. She would toss her backpack by the mudroom, steal cheddar from the fridge, and tell me about chemistry quizzes and the boy in her literature class who thought irony was a personality. In spring, we brought my green leather chair back upstairs from the basement together. The leather had dried some. One arm still bore the old wax stitches. We set it in the sunroom exactly where it had always been. When I lowered myself into it, the light hit the floorboards the same way it used to, and for the first time in months, the house stopped feeling like it was holding its breath. The final thing I did was small. Smaller than lawyers. Smaller than evidence. Smaller even than telling a dangerous man to leave. I rehung the brass key behind the pantry door. Same iron hook. Same worn shine on the edge. Same little scrape in the paint where Marianne used to miss by half an inch when her hands were full of groceries. I stood there with the key between my fingers and thought about how close I had come to being edited out of my own life by people calling themselves practical. Then Lily came in with a grocery bag and said, "Grandpa, why are you smiling at a key?" I looked at her and said, "Because it still opens the right drawer." She laughed and went to put away the milk. That night, after the dishes were done and the house had gone quiet in the honest way, not the hiding way, I walked through the rooms without turning on every light. The porch boards creaked under my weight. The river moved black and silver beyond the trees. From the hook behind the pantry door, the brass key caught a little moonlight. For the first time in a long while, nothing in that house felt borrowed. Not the table, not the study, not the silence, and not my name.